Thank you, Charlie. It's an honor for me to be able to introduce our first speaker. He's Dr. Loren Scott. He's president of Loren C. Scott and Associates, which is a 37-year-old economic consulting firm. But you'll find his many accomplishments on the back of your agenda. But I want to talk to you a little bit about how I know Dr. Scott. I was a student in one of his classes, well, several of his classes over the course of 3 years at the Graduate School of Banking at LSU. And at LSU, he is a favorite professor on campus. If many of you can imagine, banking classes are not always fun. But Dr. Scott was the exception. He is knowledgeable, he's engaging, he's thoughtful. He has taught many other bankers in this room have been to the graduate school where he was a professor, and he has educated many community bankers throughout the Southeast over probably 30 to 35 years. So I was really excited. When I heard that we were going to be able to have him here and we were going to be able to share him with you all, because I think you will find him to be engaging and thoughtful and knowledgeable as well. So, Dr. Scott.
Well, thank you, Susan. How y'all are? Good old South Louisiana greeting. I'm glad to be here. I had the best time last night having a meal here in town with Mike and Charlie, and had a good time just talking about your area and what's going on here. It's kind of like going to Mayberry RFD all over again. What a great community you have. I have a couple of concerns before I start out. I've got a lot of stuff to share with you in a fairly short period of time. As I thought about this, I was reminded of an ad that appeared back in the 1970s in the Kansas City Star newspaper. It was back in the personals section, and this is how it read: insidious, euthanasia, extrapolate, fastidious, innocuous, annihilate, audacious, interpolation, ludicrous, and euphemism. And it was signed Mark Johnson. Well, when the editor of the newspaper saw that ad, he called in his crack cub reporter and said, "Look, I don't care what you have to do. I want to know who Mark Johnson is and why he put those 10 words in my newspaper." Well, it turns out he found the kid. It turns out Mark was a sophomore at Shawnee Mission High School in Shawnee Mission, Kansas. And his English teacher told the class if anybody could find those 10 words in the newspaper that semester, they get an A in the class. So what I know, where's Mark Johnson now that we really need him? The other thing is I have some good news to share with you, maybe not so good news to share with you about what's going on in the economy. And you've heard the good news and the bad news stories, I'm sure, but there was this couple that had a daughter that they wanted to find a good Christian mate, and so they sent her off to this Christian college, hoping that she'd find somebody neat. And sure enough, in her junior year, she calls home and said, "Mom and Dad, I found the guy. He's perfect. He's going to go into the ministry. I just really love him." They said, "Great, bring him on home. We want to meet him." So they bring him home, and they have this meal. And after the meal, the father says to the young man, "Come into my office here. I want to talk to you just a minute." So he says to him now, "Let me ask you a question." He says, what if you don't end up getting your degree? How do you plan to support my daughter?" And the kid looked at him and said, "Don't worry, sir. God will provide." And he said, "Well, what if you get your degree, but you can't find a church that'll hire you? How do you plan to support my daughter?" He said, "Sir, don't worry about it. God will provide." And he said, "Well, what if you graduate from college and you find a church that'll hire you, but after a while they don't like you and they fire you? How are you going to support my daughter?" And he said, "Sir, really, just don't worry about this. God will provide." He said, "Okay." So he lets the kid go back, and he goes in the kitchen. His wife said, "How'd it go?" He said, "Well, I've got good news and I got bad news. The good news is he seems like a really nice young man. The bad news is he thinks I'm God." And I'm sure some of you are keenly aware of that, right? Well, what I want to do is talk to you about what's going on in the economy right now. Boy, this is an interesting time to be an economist, I'll tell you. There's all kinds of stuff that's happening out there. And I want to really focus on 2 or 3 things. I want to talk to you about what's going on nationally primarily, and talk a lot about tariffs. That's a big issue going on today, and help us to understand what's going on with that. Then I want to talk to you about a couple of what I call super prices. There are prices out there that impact everything. If the price of this plastic cup right here is kind of interesting, but there are some prices that impact all across the economy. I'm going to talk about those a little bit too. Now, when we talk about the national economy, we are now in our 123rd month of economic growth. This is the longest period that the United States economy has been in a growth cycle since World War II. Now, as a matter of fact, this is a chart I hope most of you can see, but if the previous record was the one between March 91 and March 2001, which is 120 months long. So this one's 123 months long. And anytime you get to something that long, people start getting nervous, and they automatically start thinking, this can't keep going on, there's going to be a recession. And so the R word keeps showing up more and more. But this has been the longest recorded boom period in our history. However, if you look at all the growth periods we've been through since World War II, and you look at the change of real gross domestic product, how strong was the growth? This was actually the weakest time period of all of these. Only 2.1% growth rate. Very common to have 4.3 and plus in previous time periods. Now, especially during the previous administration, when the economy was growing so slowly, we were told that this is the new normal, okay? And I kept telling people, this is not the new normal. This is strictly a matter of policy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you back to your Principles of Economics class. It's amazing what you learn in your Principles of Economics class can help you to understand what's going on out there right now. And so what happened was there was a switch during the previous administration from focusing on economic growth to focusing on fairness. You look around in our economy, you see a lot of things out there that just don't seem right, so by golly, we're going to fix that. And there were two primary ways of fixing that. One was a great deal of emphasis on raising taxes during this time period. Okay, we want to take money from this group and give it, switch more of it down to this group. I wish we had time to talk about income distribution just a little bit and the silliness that of our words and the way we think about this is so distorting. But the idea was we need to take, in the interest of fairness, take money from this group and give to this group. Well, you do that with taxes. Now, I hear you when you say that, kind of, but you need to understand something to learn the principles of economics. When you raise taxes, you shift the cost curves of firms upward. When you shift the cost curves of firms upward, they produce less output and hire fewer people. That's just basic economics. Now, the other thing was a heavy focus on the regulation. I'm going to show you a picture in just a minute about the level of regulation that took place during this time period. Remarkable increase in the amount of regulation. A lot of it simply by the president taking a piece of paper and signing it. Okay, again, because looking around, there's a lot of things that seem to be wrong. Well, we're going to pass a law to fix that. Now, I hear you when you say that, but you need to understand what you learned in principles class. When you increase regulations, again, you shift the cost curves of firms upward, and when you do that, firms produce less output and hire fewer people. Hence, you get 2.1% growth rate in real gross domestic product. Now, what has happened is there is a focus back now on shifting back to promoting economic growth. And by the way, when you promote economic growth, this is what happens. Everybody gets better off. And all the data from all these growth periods show that. It lifts all ships. And so what happens now is you shift back to thinking in terms of lowering taxes. So we just got through going through a very significant reduction in taxes in the United States. And what has happened, principles of economics, cost curves in firms are now dropping downward. When cost curves go downward, firms hire more people, produce more output. The economy starts to growing more. By the way, speaking of taxes, I want to show you this interesting little picture here. This is some information from 1929. The numbers are too small here. 1929 through 2017. If you look at this red line here, that's what the top marginal tax rate was every year between 1929 and 2017. Just about everybody in this room, with the possible exception of you and me, don't remember this time period. During the Eisenhower years, you all realize this, the top marginal tax rate in the United States was 91%. There was a time you earned an extra dollar, 91 cents went to the federal government, and you got to keep 9 cents. Then Jack Kennedy came along and he said, I had a principles of economics class at Harvard, believe it or not. And so he dropped the top marginal tax rate down to 70%. And then Ronald Reagan comes along and said, are you people crazy? He said, we need to drop that down even further. So in a series of 2 steps, he dropped it down to 28%. Then George Bush Sr. let his lips slip, and then Bill Clinton caused the rate to go up a little bit. And then George Bush Jr. dropped it down a little bit. Obama raised it again a little bit. But here is the really interesting thing about this chart. Y'all may not realize this, but you know, it doesn't matter what the top marginal tax rate is in this country. You people are going to figure out some way to send only 17.1% of your money into the federal government. Isn't that the damnedest thing? Pardon the damn. Isn't that the darndest thing? Isn't that the darndest thing? It's one of the great constants in nature. But my wife, a very successful businesswoman, she was the partner in charge of an office of Deloitte Haskins Sales, first woman to ever be a partner in charge of an office for a big 8 accounting firm. Right here, during this time period, the top marginal tax rate she was in charge of the tax department, too. The primary way they made money was by finding tax shelters for rich people. Then Reagan comes along and destroys our business. He drops it down to 28%. The rich people said, as they say in Texas, hell, we might as well just pay the money, and it's cheaper than buying these tax shelters. You people are going to figure out some way. So when these clowns out there are saying, you know what we need to do? We need to raise the top marginal tax rate to 91%. We're going to bring in a whole lot more money. No, you're not. You people are smart, clever, greedy capitalists, right? Right? We're all capitalists. Even ministers are capitalists. Have you ever heard of a minister that was called to a lower paying job? No. Okay, now, the other shift that is taking place is a shift towards deregulation, okay? Reducing regulations, dropping those cost curves downward, causing firms to produce more output and hire more people. This is a very telling picture here. This is a picture of the number of pages in the Federal Registry. Federal Registry from 1960 through 2017, the latest data we have. If you look at all this time period, what is this, about 5 decades, you will find that 7 of the top 10 years of additions to the Federal Registry occurred during the Obama administration. As a matter of fact, the highest ever was in 2016, the last year. Okay? Cost curves are going upward. Firms are producing less, 2.1% growth rate, right? Now, what has happened under the present president, look whatever you think about him, one of the things that happened is we've had the number of pages drop to levels we haven't seen since 1993. And not only that, but if you look at some of these pages, they were pages put in place to get rid of regulations that were put in place in the previous 8 years. So once again, there's been an emphasis on deregulation, and as a result, here's some pictures that you have. I have some data here on what has happened in green and what is expected to happen from 2 different groups. If you want a free economic forecast, Wells Fargo has a very good economics department, and you should go to Wells Fargo for economic information. You should not go to Wells Fargo for your banking services. You should go to your community bank, where people know you, know your name, and return your calls and answer your calls and things like that. But this is a good place to go to get a free analysis of all kinds of things that are going on out there in the economy. And then if you don't, there's a proverb that says, in an abundance of counselors, there's wisdom. Well, these people, Consensus Forecast USA, honed in on that. And what they do is they call around about 45 different forecasting firms in the economy, including Wells Fargo, and say, what do you think is going to happen to real gross domestic product, to housing starts, to interest rates, to automobile sales? And then they come up with an average of the group, hence the word consensus. Now, if we went back in time here, what you would find, now these are the actual data, we mapped 17, 18, what you would find is the economy was growing significantly faster, more like 2.8 to 3.1% in that general neighborhood. Now, if you look at what the forecasts are, there's good news and there's not so good news. The good news is there's no red numbers here. Neither one of these groups is forecast a recession going all the way out to 2021. That's the good news. The not so good news is look at the numbers. And these numbers have been steadily declining lately. Okay, they're now down below 2% in most cases until you get out to 2021 again. And we want to talk about why that is. And to help us kind of think about that, I want to come back to this quarter right here. You notice there's an asterisk beside the fourth quarter of 2018. Only 1.1% growth rate. Why do we have only 1.1% growth rate? And to understand that, think of this pie. I'll show you this pie in a minute. Let me see if I have the pie on here. There it is. Let me go back. Let me go ahead a little bit. If you take real gross domestic product, we're trying to figure out how much goods and services we produce in our economy, principles of economics. So we add up how much people spend, and that's how we figure out how much we produce of goods and services. And the biggest part of this pie is personal consumption spending. When you go out, you buy a suit, a car, house, whatever. That's personal consumption spending. That's 2/3 of that. If this part of the pie does not grow, the economy is not going to grow, okay? And then this part right here is business investment spending on machinery and equipment and stuff like that, especially CAT machinery. And then you have the hated government spending, federal, state, and local. And there's a little piece of pie. It's hard to put this in here because it's a negative piece of pie. If you say our imports from other countries and our spending in other countries and subtract how much we sell to them, it turns out to be a negative number. So we have a negative number there for net exports. But this thing has to grow. And so what happened, if I back up a little bit, look at these are the monthly numbers on personal consumption expenditures. Look at that thing right there. This is in December of 2018. We had this big old drop. Matter of fact, we had a drop that was so large. We haven't experienced anything like that since back in the recession of 2008, 2009, the Great Recession. And everybody was tense. Oh, man, we're getting ready to go into recession. However, there were two odd events that occurred during that time period. Odd event number one was we had the federal government shut down. Okay? So there was a lot of federal workers that did not get a paycheck during that time period. And, you don't have a paycheck, you can't spend. The second thing that happened was that the S&P 500 fell by 15% during that time period. And you people spend money not only on the basis of your income, but also on the basis of your wealth. And when 15% of your wealth went away, you grabbed hold of that pocketbook and held on to it and said, oh, shoot, wonder what's getting ready to happen. And so we had a big decline in that 2/3 part of the pie, and everybody got very tense. We got a very low growth rate, real gross domestic product. But that was temporary, because what happened was the federal government got back in business, they solved that problem, and the S&P came all the way back up again plus some. And so people started spending. As a matter of fact, pop up, baby. In March, the growth rate was up here someplace, up above where this 1.1 big old increase, and the rest of the time it's been right around here, around 4. And so what has been happening is personal consumption spending has been carrying the ball right now. It has been really growing very, very well. Let me back up a little bit. Let me back up. Come on, back up, baby. Okay, what has been happening is this has been growing very strongly. This part right here is a problem. Okay, tariffs have created a problem in this area. Businesses are looking out there and they're saying, well, shoot, it's 123 months long now, and these tariffs are screwing up the supply chain. Maybe we better hold back a little bit. So this part right here has not been growing very much. This part here is still rocking and rolling, and that's really what's got us going and kept us going so far. Now, I thought I would share with you a couple of pieces of wisdom. I'm trying to share wisdom with you. Did you know that the location of your mailbox shows you how far away from your house you can be in a robe before you start looking like a mental patient? I don't know if y'all do that. Denny's has a slogan: if it's your birthday, the meal is on us. Let me tell you something. If you're at Denny's and it's your birthday, your life really sucks. That's all I got to say about that. Come on, man. Now, there are two major threats out there. Why are those forecast numbers so much lower now? Now, the reason for that is there are two major threats to the economy going on right now. The biggest of these is the anti-free trade movement. Or is it an anti-free trade movement? And I can't tell you how important that change in voice is. Is it an anti-free trade movement, or is it something else? There have been 29, now 30, tariff-related events or announcements since last May. We used to never hear anything about tariffs. Now we've had 30 announcements of different kinds of tariffs. What's going on here? This is too busy a chart, but the main thing is look at this bottom number here. Initially, when he first started out, he wanted to levy about $500 billion worth of tariffs on all kinds of goods and services that we'll talk about in a minute. China's been kind of interesting here because he raised the tariff on Chinese goods from 10% to 25% this past spring on $250 billion worth of goods and services. Now, initially what happened is he started out levying tariffs on mainly input goods like steel and aluminum, not final consumer goods, okay? He threatened to add another 10% on $300 billion worth of final goods, toys and that sort of stuff. There was a crucial meeting this summer, the G12 summit, where Trump said, well, we'll hold off on this a little bit. August 1st, he decided to go ahead and put this in place. He then changed that to October the 1st. He then said, well, you know, of that $300 billion, I'm going to delay, since it's Christmas season, I'm going to delay the tariffs on $155 billion in goods, final goods, toys and things like that for Christmas season. Now, what I want you to notice on this, besides the fact that these tariffs are in place, look at this number, 250, and look at that number there, $300 billion worth of goods and services. I want you to kind of keep that number in the back of your head. Now, you'd think with all this tariff stuff that the international trade market will be just going through the floor. But if you look at this chart here, this top chart shows you what from 2000 through the latest data here. This is imports. Our imports really haven't changed very much. And as a matter of fact, our exports haven't really changed very much, despite all this stuff that's going on. There's a little bit of a dip here, but it's not very much of a dip. Nothing like what we experienced, during recessionary years. So it's kind of odd, isn't it, that that's been going on. Now, I told you to look at those numbers at 250 and at 300 billion for a reason. And that is because this president, it seems to me, has found a tool. And he's like a kid that was given a hammer for Christmas. Everything becomes a nail, right? And what it seems to me that this president is he's not trying to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. He's using this as a tool of foreign policy. And when it comes to China, he's got China. And the reason he's got China is because we import 4 times more from China than they buy for us. 4 times more. And so guess what what they always do, they always retaliate. When you levy tariffs on your trade department, they always retaliate. So they retaliated on 60 billion. We put tariffs on 300 and then 250. They could only turn around and put it on 60 billion of ours. Okay? Because Trump has leverage here against them, you see. He's got them, and he's in a great bargaining position because see, what is happening is China. I don't really think he's trying to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. He's trying to protect domestic industries from unfair competition. And China is terrible trade partner. They steal our intellectual property. They don't abide by the rules of the WTO. They subsidize industries that are in competition with our companies. And then Trump's coming along and say, well, they say in Texas, hell, we're not going to do this anymore. Okay, you change. Okay, and then we'll go back to getting rid of tariffs, and we'll all be much more happy. As a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting with Mexico. Back in the spring, I think it was, Trump threatened to raise tariffs on Mexican goods 5% starting in June. Okay, June the 10th. And then he was going to escalate it from 5% all the way up to 25% every month. And what he said was, you people have got to stop the flow of illegal immigrants at your southern border, down there with Guatemala. We got a problem here. And our problem is that in the month of May, there were 133,000 people that were crossing the border. 130. The population of Alexandria, Louisiana, is 50,000. This is like the population of Alexandria, Louisiana, crossing the border 2.5 times in 1 month. Look, there is no problem with immigrants coming to the United States. This country was built on immigrants coming to the United States. And we have laws that allow immigrants to come into the United States today. Okay? We can't have a situation where we just say, well, y'all come on. Germany and France have done that, and they about lost their country. Okay? We are in favor of immigrants coming to the United States, but under the rules, okay? And so what happened? By the way, these tariffs were never implemented. They were never implemented because Mexico said, well, why did Mexico respond so quickly? Here's why. Our exports to Mexico is 1.2% of our gross domestic product is 21% of Mexico's gross domestic product. He has leverage, right? And he used that leverage, and Mexico said, oh, hell, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to do this anymore. Now, in the interest of time, I might skip through this fairly quickly. The primary reason that economists are so nervous about this, and the reason that the numbers are so small for the next 2 years, is because of this thing called the law of comparative advantage. Now, in your principles of economics class, you learn 3 important laws. We call them laws because we have no scientific evidence, key word is scientific, no scientific evidence of these laws ever being violated. The law of demand, when the price goes down, people buy more, price goes up, people buy less. Other things remain the same. The law of, that other law, and then the cost law. And then the other law is the law of comparative advantage, okay? The law of comparative advantage basically says this: when countries get together and lower barriers to trade between them, the standard of living in all countries goes up. If you raise barriers to trade between yourselves, the standard of living in all countries, goes down. Raise tariffs, your GDP should start going down. You make people worse off. Now, I could prove that to you with math, which I know would excite all of you. Or I could prove it to you with graphs, which I know would really excite all of you. Or let me just give you an intuitive idea of why that law is true. If it really is a good idea in the United States for us to erect barriers to trade around the United States and only buy American-made products, if that really makes us better off, what you people in Alabama should do is erect barriers to trade around Alabama and only buy Alabama products made in Alabama. Now, if that makes people in the United States better off, people in Alabama better off, what Gunterville should do is erect barriers to trade around Gunterville and only buy stuff from Gunterville people only. But if that makes people in Gunterville better off and people in Alabama better off and people in the United States better off, what Mike Alford should do is erect barriers to trade around his house and grow his own food and make his own clothes. You probably said, it looks like he might do that. And no, I'm just kidding. Make his own cars. Well, you know Mike would be worse off, don't you? You know him to be worse. But what is true for him is true for Guntersville, is true for Alabama, is true for the United States. Okay? And the idea is you engage in trade. You do the thing you do the best. Be a great a great community banker. And then you trade for stuff, for cars, for tires, for whatever, okay, with other people. We're all better off in that case. Now, just to show you that you're better off, let me show you a picture for good classic case for Alabama. North American Free Trade Agreement was passed in the early 1990s, around 1992 or so. Look what happened to non-durable good employment in Alabama after that law was passed. You lost 100,000 non-durable goods jobs. Almost all of them textile and apparel related. Okay? However, if you look at total Alabama employment during that time period, you had one of your greatest growth periods in your history. You lost in the lowest wage industry in manufacturing. You gained in some of the highest wage industries like cars and car parts and all kinds of other things. Chemicals, you name it. And that's what happened. That's what the law of comparative advantage says. You're going to end up being more better off. Now, when you engage in international, this is what is in the back of all economists' minds is when you raise tariffs on somebody, the other side always retaliates. You cannot kick economic sand in the face of your trading partners and then say, well, that's tasty sand. That ain't the way it works. They always retaliate. Now, this is a picture of the average tariff rate. This is an old picture. Matter of fact, I showed it to Susan back in the old days when we were teaching at LSU. This is the average tariff rate in the United States from 1929 through the early part of the 1990s. Why, Lord, did you start with 1929? Okay. What very important event occurred in 1929? The Great Depression. You think the Great Recession was bad? You've seen nothing. This was way bad. The Great Depression occurred for a number of reasons. One was the Fed took 1/3 of the money supply out of the system. You're going to have a recession. But the other thing that happened is we passed the Smoot-Hartley Act. We said, by golly, we're going to protect our domestic industries from foreign competition. Let me show you what happened when that occurred. This is a great little visual here put together by Charles Kinderberger, a very famous international trade economist. If you come to right here, in January of 1929, about $3 billion worth of goods and services being traded between us and other countries, then we raised our tariffs. Well, they said, all right, we'll raise our tariffs. So we said, we'll raise ours some more. We said, well, we'll raise ours some more. We got involved in a trade war that was so bad, by the time you get to January of 1933, the volume of international trade between us and other countries had dropped by 2/3. You cannot have a 2/3 drop in international trade without sending your economy into the tank. Okay, that's just that's why economists are worried right now. We don't want to get into this. You get into a real trade war, you will not win. Everybody will end up losing. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this chart real quick. Now, here's the question. Remember I said, why did I change the tone of my voice? Is this a negotiating gambit on his part, or is this protectionism? Okay? And all of our forecasts are based on this being a negotiating gambit. He's trying to get he's using this as a tool of foreign trade. It's unusual, it's weird. But we had the changes in the EU, and Mexico has responded properly. If we're wrong, and he's really saying, I'm going to protect domestic industries from foreign competition, you're going to see that spider web occur, and we're going to go into a recession that's going to make 08 and 09 look trivial. Okay? It can really be bad. Now, and the primary reason right now it's a struggle is because think of these components. Again, when he starts raising tariffs, the market starts reacting by going down, and when it goes down, you people start hanging on to your billfold. This goes down. This part goes down because businesses aren't sure about the supply chains, and they're worried about uncertainty. Uncertainty is the bane of business investment spending, so they quit. As a matter of fact, this is not doing very well right now. And then this darn part here gets worse because we're buying a bunch of stuff from China. You think, well, we're going to put tariffs on stuff that we buy from China. That'll bring this to... No, because the dadgun Chinese engage in currency manipulation. They manipulate their currency so that it almost offsets the tariffs. On the other hand, our exports go down. It makes that thing even worse. So you can see why this is just a very, very tricky thing right now. By the way, speaking of threats, do y'all know why Batman wears dark clothing? Because Batman does not want to get shot. Okay. Do you know why Robin wears bright clothing? Because Batman does not want to get shot. Okay? Now, we talked about something that's a real threat to our economy. Let me tell you, long run, there's something that's a way worse threat to our economy than tariffs, and that is the promotion of socialism. I can't believe what people are thinking now, what they're listening to, and what they're saying openly on television. It's unbelievable to me. If you do nothing else, I have must-read for all CPAs, a CPA over here. This is a must-read for everybody in this room. Go to the internet, Council of Economic Advisors, and look up this little document here. So you can talk to your kids, you can talk to your business associates, you can talk to your friends about why this is remarkably stupid. Okay? A lot of data in there. Here are the basic tenets of socialism. The distribution of income in the United States is unjust on the basis of exploitation. There are these differences in income, and it's because of exploitation. It is not because you decided while you were in high school to study, to go to the library on weekends instead of going out and get drunk, okay, or playing or whatever, and you decided to go to college and give up all those 4 years of income. You decided to go to college in a tough subject, and you studied real, real hard, and then you went to work for somebody, and you went into the training program, and you studied real, real hard, and now if you're an accountant, you work 60 hours a week during tax season, okay, to keep your thing going, and as a result, you're up here, and the person that decided high school was just a waste of time dropped out, and maybe works 40 hours a week. Well, if you work 40 hours a week, go home, and the reason for this gap is because of exploitation. It's not because of exploitation, because of decisions that people make. Because of decisions that people make. This idea of this exploitation is crazy. Now, the way you fix this, of course, this injustice is to have extensive state control, especially, here's the idea here. Look at the single-payer healthcare system. Here's what you do. You have very high tax rates. We're going to take from each according to his abilities, and public services and hand out much of the nation's goods and services free to each according to his needs. Does that sound familiar to you? That's straight out of Das Kapital by Karl Marx. And historically what countries have done, who've gone this route, is they've done it in the area of agriculture. They looked around and said, in our country right now, we have all these little bitty farms owned by individual persons. Here's what we'll do. Instead of having a bunch of little individual farms, we're going to consolidate them all into one big farm, enjoy economies of scale, and the farm is now going to be run by the government. Now, put in the back of your head someplace this important note. When you own something, you watch things carefully. These guys that own this bank, they watch things. They want to be efficient. They want to make sure your calls are returned. They want to make sure they know your name. They're going to be efficient because it's their money. It's their investment. But if you're working for the government, it's not your money. The incentives to be, I'm not saying terrible things about government, folks, but the incentives to be efficient and do the very best job you can, it's not your money. That's a very important difference. And as a result, when they've done this, the result has always, every time, been substantially less food and tens of millions of deaths of starvation. So the CEA's conclusion is, if that was a result of imposing socialism on agriculture, guess what's going to happen? We turn health care over to the government. If you think turning health care over to the government is a good idea, you might want to have a long chat with some veterans. Just have some long chats with some veterans. And ask, what do you think about this? Is it a really good plan or not a really good plan? The U.S. adopts, according to the CEA, the U.S. adopts Medicare for all. No new taxes are imposed to finance it. More than half the entire existing budget would need to be cut, which means Huntsville is going to go through the tank. Because the first place it's going to get cut is the military side. If financed through higher taxes, U.S. real gross domestic product would fall about 9%, about $7,000 per person. Now, this is probably too small for any of you to see, but when somebody tells you it's now going to be free, it ain't going to be free. This document was put together by the Canadian healthcare system. And what it shows, seniors who have waited at least 4 weeks to see a specialist in the last 4 years. In Canada, the number is 69%. In the United States, it's 21%. In Canada, there's a great group called, in the University of British Columbia, called the Fraser Institute that keeps up with waiting lines. You know, if I got off the plane yesterday and said, well, Mike, I'm having trouble seeing here, he takes me, he'll immediately get in to see a doctor. I'll get to see a doctor that day, eye doctor that day. He said, boy, it looks like you're developing cataracts. You need to go see a specialist in this. So I go see the specialist, and he said, yeah, cataracts, you need to have eye surgery. And 2 weeks later, I have eye surgery. In Canada, you wait 26 weeks to see the GP. 26 weeks later, you get to see the eye doctor. And another 20 weeks or so, you get your surgery. You're going to pay in waiting times. And this was put together by the Canadian people. A good indicator of who's got the best healthcare system is where are the health demand flows. Are people flowing into Canada, or are people from Canada flowing to the United States? That's pretty straightforward. So their conclusions, let me just here, look, let me give you a visual. I love visuals. This is a picture of the United States taken at night back in about 2006. Lights every place, okay? This is a picture of, this is a picture of South Korea taken at night. That's what North Korea looks like at night, folks. There's not a light on in North Korea. As a matter of fact, if we back this up a little bit, here's Japan, South Korea. This vast dark area here is the USSR and Red China. You do nothing else. You get down on your hands and knees tonight. You think God Almighty that somewhere along the line your ancestors chose the way of capitalism rather than socialism. Because, well, I think this is a telling picture. I think this is a great picture. This explains the whole thing to you. This is what it's going to be like. I just can't believe this. More wisdom. It's strange how drinking 8 glasses of water a day seems impossible, but 8 cups of coffee goes down like a chubby kid on a seesaw. You ever know that? Exercise makes you look better naked, okay? So does wine. It's your choice. The more you weigh, the harder you are to kidnap. So stay safe, eat cake. That'll be good for you. How are we doing time? Oh, shoot. All right, I'm going to look at some super prices with you real quick now, shift gears a little bit. And I want to first of all talk to you about the price of money, okay, which is the key super price. It affects everything in our economy. And I want to start with this picture of the conventional mortgage interest rate by quarter from 1975 through some forecasts we have for 2021. How many people in this room remember this? Very few people do, I'm sure. But if I put the prime rate up here instead of conventional mortgage rate, the prime rate at one point reached 21.5% in the early part of the 1980s. I think the early part of 1981. Why did the prime rate get to 21.5%? And then why have interest rates fallen so much over time? And to understand that, let's just think about the components of the interest rate. Suppose I go to Mike and I say, Mike, I want to borrow $100 for a year. And Mike says, okay, I'm going to loan you $100 a year, but you need to pay me something for giving up the use of my $100 for a year. And the amount that he's going to charge me is called the basic rate. That's historically been around 3%. So Mike says, okay, I'm going to give you the $100, but at the end of the year, I want you to give me $103 because I want to be paid $3 for giving up the use of my money for a year. Now, if he thinks there's some probability I'm not going to pay this loan off, he's going to add a risk premium, but Mike knows I'm a riskless loan. Okay, so he's not going to charge a risk premium. But if he thinks, I'm saying Mike, I mean, say Charlie. Did I say, which one did I say? Either one. Okay, Charlie said, but what if he thinks there's going to be 3% inflation over the period of this loan? He's going to take that 3% basic rate and add a 3% inflationary premium. So he's going to end up charging me a total of 6%. Why did the prime rate get to 21.5% back here? Because the inflation rate was rocking along at 18.5%. So lenders took that 3% basic, added on an 18.5% inflationary premium, and got 21.5%. Why have interest rates fallen so much over time? Because the Federal Reserve has done a great job of getting rid of inflation in the economy, so that inflationary premium component has drifted down to almost nothing, as it turns out. And so as a result, we actually have interest rates probably falling again this coming sometime in October, probably next month. Fed dropping the interest rates again by maybe 1/4 point. They can't drop it very much farther because it's already very, very low. And the primary reason that we should expect interest rates to be low is because if you look at the forecast for inflation, we don't have a problem with inflation. Okay? We don't have to be adding on a big inflationary premium, so this super price is going to stay relatively low. Now, by the way, I was going to mention to y'all, I really meant it when I said driving around your community reminded me of Mayberry RFD. As I studied Mayberry, I always wondered this, I had this question in my head. Why was Mayberry so peaceful? And I've studied this and I figured it out. As it turns out, the reason Mayberry is so peaceful is because nobody was married. I mean, you look at it, Andy, Aunt Bee, Barney, Floyd, Howard, Goober, Gomer, Sam, Ernest T. Bass, Helen, Thelma Lou, Claire, of course, Opie, they're all single. The only person who was married was Otis, and he was drunk and in jail all the time. I'll tell you. Y'all seem to have pulled it off despite that. Either that or you're drunk all the time. I don't know which one it is. Okay. All right, I got a little time. I want to talk to you a little bit about the price of oil. Here's another price there's a lot of interesting things going on. This is a crazy industry. This is a very important super price to talk about. This is a picture of the price of oil from 1980 through our forecast for 2021. And basically what we are forecasting is the price of oil will remain steady at around $60 a barrel. This forecast was put together before the events of this past weekend. And I'll show you in just a second. Now notice that this is our forecast of $59, around a range of $30 to $90 a barrel. You're probably saying, hell, I can do that. Why do you have such a big range around your point forecast? The reason we have such a big range around our point forecast was two main reasons. Number one, 67% of the oil reserves in the world are under the lands of countries where the government's running the oil company. And you never know what they're going to do. Who would have guessed that this big drop would have occurred between 2014 and 2016. Who would have guessed that would have happened? And that happened because one country decided they wanted to kill the shale industry in this country. So Saudis turned on the faucet, pumped a lot of oil on the market, drove the price down to under 30 at one point, trying to kill the shale industry. I mean, who could have predicted that? Some day they wake up and do that. Who could have predicted what happened this past weekend? And anytime you see something this variable, okay, I taught forecasting MBAs, executive MBAs, for 30 years. The more variable something is, the tougher it is to forecast. The more variable something is, the tougher it is to forecast accurately. Did y'all hear that? Isn't it obvious that if this was a straight line going up, it's easy to forecast, but this is hard to forecast? This is the second most difficult thing in the economy to forecast, is oil prices. The most difficult thing in the economy to forecast is the weather. But we believe people who say they can forecast the weather 30 years in the future, plus or minus 2 degrees. And we need to change everything about the way we live because of this. You need to keep in the back of your head, follow the money. This is a $2 billion industry that the press has totally bought into. The idea is you could forecast this. If I told you I could forecast oil prices, you could look at this and I say I could forecast oil prices 30 years in the future, plus or minus $2 a barrel. We need to change all of our tax rates, all the way we live. You'd have said I'm crazy when I listen to you. But we listen to people who say they can forecast the weather. Okay? Now, you might say, well, climate is changing. Duh. I'm sorry, but if you're 35, I can see why you'd buy into that. If you're my age, then you don't buy into it. You've seen a lot of stuff. You know what the headline said on the first Earth Day 33 years ago? Go look it up on the web. You know what it said? Man-made global cooling is going to destroy this earth if we don't do something about it. Look it up. Because we were going through a cold spell. I wasn't asked to talk about this. I'm going to get off of this. All right, now, why do we think why are we worried about the price of oil? This is a picture of, it's the price of something. Must be because principles of economics, supply and demand, right? So on the demand side is just going straight up. The demand for crude petroleum is just going straight up. And it should keep going up more and more because you got countries like China and Japan, China and India that are huge economies that are not even beginning to be card yet. Okay? So there's a lot of growth there expected in the future. The demand side has never been a problem. The demand side, you should see oil prices going up. Okay? It's putting upward pressure. The supply side is an absolute nightmare. Starting nowadays with this picture here. This is a picture of oil production in the United States. And if you start here in October of 1970, we peaked in our production at about 10 million barrels of oil per day. And then all of our fields are old. I mean, and fields have decline curves in them. Okay, after you start producing a lot, then the field gets old and you produce less and less. And our fields got to producing less and less, so that our production dropped all the way down to 4.7 million barrels per day in October of 2008. Gee, how are we going to make that gap up? The way we made that gap up was by importing oil from the Saudis. Okay? Then some smart, clever, greedy capitalists figured out a way to frack shale. And suddenly, our oil production by April of 15 was up to 9.6 million barrels of oil per day. Now, you would think that's really good unless you're the Saudis. You just lost a huge market share. And you say, oh, hell. So they turned on the faucet. They said, we're going to kill this shale plate. They turned on the faucet. They drove the price down to under 30 at one point. But it didn't kill it because they're smart, clever, greedy capitalists in the shale industry. They figured, when back here, the break-even point for them was about $80 a barrel. By here, it was 30. That's how much they'd driven their cost. They got really smart. They drove their cost down. And so the Saudis saw this happen, and they also saw their sovereign wealth fund going like this because the price of oil was so low. And so finally they said, oh, hell. And so in the early part of 2016, they turned the faucet back again, and the price of oil went back up to where it is now. And look what happened. Look what's been happening to U.S. oil production. It's been going straight through the ceiling. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of the EIA forecasts of oil production, this is what their forecasts were in 2017, 2018, 2019. This is going up and up and up and up and up. And all this production being produced in the United States, there are no controls on this, except you investors. There's no controls. A lot more oil is coming on, and that's one of the things keeping a tamper down on the price of oil. Now, so what's happened to U.S. production is having a tendency to bring the price down. Russia and OPEC, now there's not just an OPEC, there's an OPEC plus. Okay, the OPEC and the gaseous stands and opposite stands have gotten together, and they have taken 1.2 million barrels of oil off the market. And we need to watch this group very closely, as it turns out. At the end of June, they extended their cuts for 9 months. Venezuela, again, your friends who believe in socialism, tell them to take a good hard look at Venezuela. You can't get a roll of toilet paper in Venezuela. Chavez took a country that was growing like crazy and turned it into a toilet, okay, by going the way of socialism. Before he took over, they were producing 3.6 million barrels of oil. They're now down to 1.4. Canada, I'm not going to talk about Canada too much, but they're reducing production because they have a very heavy crude. Civil unrest in Libya and Nigeria. Libya, you have this battle going on between Haftar and this word here. And as a result, you never know what's going to come out of Libya. Mainly, it's going down, as it turns out. And then you got the reimposition of sanctions on Iran by the Trump administration. Initially, it took off 1.3 million barrels of oil from them, but a waiver was given to India and South Korea. So they could still get about 1 million barrels of oil from Iran. And then in May, those waivers were taken away, and Trump said you can't take any oil from them. They're down to another 1 million barrels taken off. You got declining supplies in conventional fields in Norway, Gabon, and Libya. And then you got this issue here. This is a 1/5, 20% of the world's oil supplies come out of here, and they come by ship right through this little, 21-mile gap here called the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranians have captured some ships there and stopped some ships, attacked some ships there, and that's been a real serious problem. That's matter of fact, if you're trying to buy insurance for one of these shipping companies, you got a real problem right now. Now, this latest thing this weekend, how worried should we be about this bombing, this drone attack that knocked out these facilities in Saudi Arabia? I don't think you're going to see, we don't know a whole lot about the level of damage yet, but I don't think you're going to see a major spike in prices immediately. Part of the reason for that is that the Saudis already have a 26-day supply of oil in inventories and tanks. So they're going to be able to meet all the demand coming from these tankers and stuff for the next 26 days. In addition to that, everybody that's a member of the International Energy Administration, which is a UN group, and it includes the United States, and Mexico includes all the European countries, they are required, we have been required to hold 90 days of inventories at all times. The United States has the SPR, Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's where ours is right now. So we've got oil available right there. Iran, that you could lift Iran and Venezuelan sanctions. I don't think they're going to need to do that. The futures market is still in contango. Now, what that means from a finance standpoint is right now, the spot price is here at 62. The futures price is down here. The market doesn't think that in the future the price is going to go to 80. The market thinks this is going to get fixed and the price is going to go down again, mainly because all the dead oil coming out of the United States. But our paper wrote, the headlines of the Baton Rouge paper said prices soared as a result of this attack. Prices went from 54 to 62. I don't call that soaring. Soaring would go from 54 to 80. I would call that soaring. This is a significant bump, but it hasn't been that big a bump, okay? So it looks like we're going to be okay with that. The big issue is the war going to escalate in the Middle East? If it escalates in the Middle East, then we are in deep trouble. So we still have prices flat through 2021, But again, remember that range. Now, let me finish with this interesting picture. This was put together by the people of the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This is a map of the United States, and what they've done, they've taken different countries of the world, and they compared their real gross domestic product to different states in the United States. Your friends who believe in socialism are going to say, look at Norway. And you should immediately say two things to them. Number one, refer them to the CEA data. Norway is not a socialist country anymore. They tried that back in the 70s, and they said, oh, hell, this is stupid. But the other thing is people in the United States think Norway is like the United States. Norway is like Maryland. It's like a very small state, the United States. As a matter of fact, the United Kingdom's real gross domestic product is about the size of Canada's. About the size of California. Texas has about the same real gross domestic, just the state of Texas. A Texan never says that phrase. The state of Texas has the same real gross domestic product as the entire country of Canada. Okay? You people here in Alabama have about the same, this has got to be an old number, same real gross domestic product as Venezuela. But here's the really interesting thing about this. Let me show you this. California has the same real gross domestic product as the United Kingdom. But California produces that with 9.3 million people. The UK requires 2 times more than that to produce the same real gross domestic product. Texas has the same real gross domestic product as Canada, but Texas produces that with 13.5 million people. Canada requires 20 million people to do that. New York has the same real gross domestic product as South Korea. New York does that with 1/3 the number of people of South Korea. Listen, if you do nothing else tonight, you get down on your hands and knees and you thank God Almighty that sometime, somewhere in the past, your ancestors decided to go the way of capitalism instead of socialism. Because I promise you, that made all the difference in your lives. I enjoyed being with you folks. Thank you for the invitation to come down.